Hi, and welcome to this special Impetus interview. Today we are joined by Thibaut Datry, who is a freshwater scientist at the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and the Environment, who is also leading the EcoFlows Lab in Lyon, France, and is the coordinator of the DRYRivERS H Horizon 2020 project, which generated the DRYRivERS citizen science effort. Thank you for joining us today, Thibaut.
Thank you, Chris.
So I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit why the project is focused on dry rivers and their importance to the ecosystem, I suppose.
Sure. So you have to know that first of all, river networks are very important on Earth. They provide biodiversity, like many species are described from freshwater. They provide lots of ecosystem services for humans. So basically, the people and non-human cannot live without rivers. But most of the river sciences, including the tools that are being produced for management, are derived from perennial rivers, which means rivers that flow all year round. And since the past, let's say 15 years, there were growing evidence that rivers and streams that occasionally cease flow and or dry are very important. And very recently, that was 3 years ago, they were the first estimate of the prevalence of these, let's say, non-perennial rivers and streams. And we realized that the majority of the river network is actually non-perennial, which means that we need to catch up with the knowledge of river science to include these non-perennial rivers and streams. So the importance to lead research on that. And this is particularly important because due to climate change, even though lots of rivers are naturally intermittent, more and more are drying due to climate change and human uses of fresh water, including groundwater and surface water.
So I suppose there's just a bit of a black hole when it comes to hydrology knowledge about these rivers that aren't there 100% of the time, but are still quite important for ecosystems as sort of oases during the summer or kind of places for habitats to survive intermittently, I suppose.
I can give you two examples of the problem is that every river network has some streams, rivers that are drying. When they are flowing during, for example, the winter season, everything is connected, which means that everything that happens in one part of the river network will eventually have effect downstream in perennial rivers or in groundwater. So we do need to include those intermittent rivers and streams into the understanding of how rivers work and also in the management of river network. Otherwise, we put water resources and biodiversity at high risk.
I suppose they act like these little pathways that allow habitats to connect to each other, I suppose. And with climate change, as you mentioned, and the changing in weather patterns, these are, well, I imagine either flooding or more often than, well, with like high volume of water during flooding seasons or dried up during kind of dry spells, and also changes in our human activity of how we use this resource, I suppose, just threatens these habitats.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's not only the change in flow, for example, flow regime due to climate change, but also some rivers are actually experiencing tipping points. Large rivers, which never dried in the past, let's say, 10,000 years in Europe since the last glaciation, they're starting to dry. So this is clearly a tipping point for aquatic biota and all the function that the species provide, because they don't know how to cope with that. In contrast, the rivers that have been dry for a long time, evolution has triggered adaptation. So some species that are living in naturally intermittent rivers, they know how to cope with drying. For example, I can develop that later if you want, but there are strategies that organisms have used to cope with drying when drying is natural. But this is not the case when drying is very recent due to climate change. For example, the biodiversity it cannot adapt in a few years or in a few decades. It takes like centuries, millennia to adapt.
So that's really interesting. And yeah, just the rapid change of how the rapid change that we're seeing is just nature and these hydrology systems can't catch up with how rapidly these habitats are changing and these how these systems are working, I suppose. Uh, so with the Drivers project and the Dry Rivers citizen science effort, you've been working with stakeholders and with the general public to collect data on these habitats and these intermittent rivers. I was just wondering if you talk about the efforts that the role that the citizen scientists have played within the Divers project.
Yeah. So first of all, let me explain why we needed that. I mean, we could not do much because, as I said, most of river science is coming from perennial rivers. So if you look into, let's say, global discharge database, every country is monitoring the flow of rivers for flood protection mostly. There is no intermittent rivers, or very few, because it has been out of the radar from managers. So we don't have data. And if you are an hydrologist and you need to calibrate an hydrological model, if you don't have flow observation that tells you it was dry that day, for how long it was dry there but not there, etc., you cannot do science. So the first need of the citizen science approach was to collect data for scientists, because states are not monitoring intermittent rivers. This is true in Europe and in most countries. So we need data. So citizen science is a very powerful mean of gathering data. And with DRYRivERS, it actually was a real success, because after a year of the project running, we had more than 2,000 observation of flow state in Europe, and in particular in the region that we are modeling in the driver project. So all this data have been successfully used by our hydrologists to calibrate spatially distributed model that are now able to tell you, with this type of climate, you will have this percentage of the network dry, and you can also propagate that in the future, because we have modeled future scenario of climate change. So that's really the physical foundation of ecological research, and that's really useful. So first, that was for scientists, but we realized very quickly that there is also a strong need from managers to have this type of data, because, as I was telling you, there is no database of drying events. It does not exist. So we needed to develop one, because it has been uptaken by water managers, local in France, for example, to analyze flow states of river network and then inform the national regulatory body to say, look, there is a problem. You have to set up restriction of water uses because everything is drying. So it has been used for regulatory purposes successfully in different countries, and I've got very good example in France. So it's both for managers and for scientists. And the last interesting point with the citizen science approach is that probably before you talk to me, you did not realize that intermittent river were the majority of the river, right? And that's true for most people, most societies. So with this project and with the citizen science initiative, we are able to raise awareness of the prevalence of intermittent rivers and also about the complexity. As I was telling you, some naturally dry every year at the same time. Some others are drying earlier for longer time due to climate change, and some rivers are just drying since the past 2 summers we had in Europe that were very dry throughout Europe. Some rivers have started to dry. And last, some rivers, especially at this time of the year where you can see the temperature is extremely high, rivers that were supposed to be dry because they are located in alpine region, because the temperature is so high, because of snow melt of glacier disappearance, some rivers are becoming perennial, whereas they were naturally intermittent before. So to understand all this change and to raise awareness to the public, this is the third value of the citizen science project.
So it's a way of informing the general public about this unseen like river system, these secret rivers almost that are very important to a lot of hydrology and a lot of ecology, but also to drive decision makers with policy and with scientific research, I suppose. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the work of the citizen scientists. So you've developed a DRYRivERS app, which they can use to collect data from these dry rivers, intermittent rivers, sorry, I should say. Could we talk a little bit about how that was developed and the field work that the citizen scientists do? Do they go and see? I used to do freshwater ecology, so a little bit of this is it's in the back of my brain somewhere. Doing these, doing like river profiles of like depth or flow rates, or is it mostly just or species diversity, I suppose, or is it more just them walking along the river and seeing if it's a river or not, in simple terms?
Okay, two elements. First, there are lots of hydrological citizen science applications that are existing already. I can give you different examples in Europe, in the US, and they are running very well, but they are dedicated to perennial river mostly. So they do, let's say, measuring water depth, water discharge, taking photo of the discharge. So because this existed, we didn't want to duplicate that. In contrast, there is no application that currently just tells you whether a river is dry or not. So we focused our effort on that. And the second element is that for every citizen science initiative, if you make things too complex, it does not work. It's already difficult. I think we will discuss about that later, but it's difficult to engage citizens to collect data. And if we work on an application that is measuring the color of the water, the invasive species, the presence of fish, the presence of contamination, it will be so complex, and we did test before, that it will not work. So we have decided to use the simplest approach as possible, is that with the application, you go to a stream, you just take a picture and you say, if there is water with flow, if there is water without flow, or if there is no water. Only three categories. That's simple. Nobody can make mistake. There is not too much, let's say, observer's bias that is known to be a problem to use citizen science data in the science domain. So with that, we've got three categories. And because it's so quick that everyone that is, for example, driving home, go over a bridge, can take a picture every day. And we have people who have been observing the same spot every day throughout the dry period, for example. So it's not only giving us a snapshot of the status of flow, it's also giving us an idea of the temporal variability of flow state at different sites. So that's really useful, but very simple. And we don't want to complexify it, because that's the way, I think, to go to have a successful citizen science application.
I like the idea of just keeping it simple. I think not you can get bogged down with the details and lost in the weeds a little bit when it comes to citizen scientists, science approaches. And yeah, if you can incorporate something quite easy and something that you can kind of apply universally, it just means that everyone's data is almost exactly universal and can be applied to any kind of situation, I suppose. So as you say, people can take a picture on their drive back home, or if they're going for a walk, they can just like in the countryside, and they can correspond that with perhaps these maps of where these rivers would be, and just sort of take a quick picture while they're enjoying their walk, I suppose.
Yeah, and align with that, we have set up a module on the application that if you go to a place that is very remote and there is no cell phone coverage, you can still take a picture and point on a map that is offline where you have made the observation, which means that you can basically use it everywhere, anytime.
That's also very useful, I imagine, just because if people are off grid, quote unquote, and don't have signal but would want to update, yeah, just that ability to pinpoint where they are and update that data when they then regain Wi-Fi or internet access. I imagine, yeah, it simplifies the process and just streamlines it in such a way that allows anyone at any time, anywhere, to add data, I suppose. You touched upon this topic, but I might bring it up now. How did you get the citizens involved? What sort of how did you get them engaged? How did you get people knowing about? Did you do workshops with local communities? What was your outreach, and how did you get people engaged with the project?
To me, that's a key question, because that's what will determine the success or failure of any citizen science project. So we started as simple as possible. We started with a very narrow geographical scope, which were the case study of the project we are leading. So the DRYRIVERS project has 6 case studies from Finland to Spain, France, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Croatia. And there we have selected a river network that on which we have modeled flow, biodiversity, ecosystem function, and services. So there we organize local workshop. We communicated with all type of stakeholder, from water manager to just people, citizens, mayor, local authority. And then we had for 1 year intensive effort of communicating. We made flyers in different languages. We, as you notice probably that the application is translated into 23 different languages for that purpose. And then that was just communication. We actually had one postdoc that was in the project dedicated to launch and animate this network. So a huge effort. It worked quite well. So gradually we expanded the geographical scope by just contacting higher level stakeholder, let's say a regional water authority, and with some sort of proof of concept of the success, like success story, like, look, this works very well here. You could perhaps communicate to your network. It gradually increased, and now it is being used in most countries in Europe. It's been used in South America, North America, in Afghanistan, and it's just growing naturally. Having said that, that was to start. Then now we are, let's say, with cruise pace, I would say. We still have the number of people doing this. Every time, for example, this interview may just put a jump in the number of users. I can give you a very striking example. In France, I communicated a lot, so it's quite well used, as well as in Hungary. I was interviewed during the last drought this summer on the national TV for 10 seconds, only 10 seconds, just to say, look, there is this application. Immediately after that, the following day, the number of people registering on the application doubled in France. So it's all about communication. And that's not easy because we are scientists. We cannot spend all of time to communicate about what we do. We need to do something. It's also a proper job, So everything is about communication. So we maximize the flyers, brochures, interview on TV, national, regional, on radio, and that's how gradually it grew. But still, the question is, how can we maintain it without spending too much energy? There is a critical mass of effort to be made to ensure that there is a regular animation of the network.
But it does seem, I understand, keep maintaining this momentum and maintaining this issue in the public eye takes constant effort. But from what you were just saying, from just these snippets on TV, 10 seconds, you were saying in an interview, and it doubling kind of activity, people do seem to be resonating with this topic. It does seem to be something that is of interest to the general public.
Yeah, it is. But we have to be a bit strategic. For example, in many countries, autumn was raining every day. In France, it has been raining almost every day in November, December. So of course, it's not the right time to communicate about drying event. If we had to, I would avoid to have an interview on radio or TV during that period. So we know that spring is arriving. It will probably be dry, as it has been, like the trend is here, and we cannot do much about it. So it's also to time the communication with the reality, right? So when rivers will start drying, we will put effort again to say, okay, in 2024, if you want to help scientists, if you want to help manager, if you want to care about your river, you can use the app, make observations, send us the data, etc. So we will start that, I guess, in March. There is no point of doing this right now because the situation is, not under the spotlight, let's say.
From looking on your website, it just demonstrates how vast this network has grown, though, and it's very impressive just how widespread there is data collected, I suppose. And yeah, just a lot of very impressive little spots on your little heat map on your website. So it's very impressive just to see the amount of outreach you've managed to and the amount of data that you've collected through these efforts. I was just wondering if you've talked a little bit about the impact of this research and this data, but I was just wondering if there was any other kind of success stories about how this data has driven research or policymakers or decision makers in these regions, I suppose.
So I can give you several examples, but just two, one on the science side and one on the water management side. Scientifically, and now it's out, we have been able to develop and calibrate hydrological models, like mechanistic hydrological model across 6 different river networks throughout Europe. And that would have been impossible without this data, just because we have one flow gauging station per case study, let's say, which is not sufficient to do any spatial interpolation of flow. So now we've got on real time the amount of water that is circulating on these 6 river networks. That was a real challenge for hydrologists. We made it, and we made it thanks to this application mostly. And of course, thanks to the good team of hydrologists that we've got, of course, but they needed data. So that's for the science. For the regulation and the management aspect, there is, I guess, that's the example in France, but it happens in most countries. There are alerts, like when the situation is getting very dry, the state has to make a restriction. Let's say you cannot use water for your gardening, you cannot fill your swimming pool or wash your car, you cannot use water for agriculture. And the past 2 summers in Europe, in most countries, we reached this critical threshold. But for the state, it's very difficult to make those decisions. Are quite unpopular. Like if you ask farmer not to use water, you know what will happen. You can see what's happening right now. But still, if the water is at risk, like we have to make choice on water uses, and there are no tools to do that. This application allowed local managers to say, in my area, I've got 50% of the stream that are lacking water. That's my limit. I need to do something, otherwise everything will dry. All the fish are going to die. People cannot, tourists in summer cannot do canoeing, cannot do swimming or whatever. So we have to take measure. And this has been implemented at least in 3 different areas in France, where local managers are now using the app. We have designed a specific account for them so they can share the account with all the different people involved. And they just monitor the flow every 2 weeks, and they inform the state about the flow status in this region. And then the state has taken decision about what types of water restriction and what threshold of water restriction should be made. So it has also been successful for managing water.
I suppose it's one of those things we all go to our taps. We just expect water to run, but we kind of forget that although it is a cycle and water does come back around again, it's a resource that we need to look after, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, you have example right now. Barcelona is running out of water, like cities of millions of inhabitants has no tap water. Because of successive drought. And this happened in summer in many, many villages in France, for example, that ran out of water. So in some region, the state has to decide to, okay, you stop using water even for agriculture. You just let crop die, because the minimum water we need is for drinking. And we are at risk of running out of water, so stop everything else. And I'm not optimistic, but it seems that this trend is going to continue and to worsen in the next years.
I suppose that just goes to show how important projects like yours are, I suppose, just as we mentioned at the top of the interview, global warming, climate change, these things that we used to take for certain aren't, they're not, these resources aren't as reliable as they used to be. They aren't just, as you say, turn on a tap and they're there. So having these efforts to really give us a bigger picture of the state of play of hydrology is so important. And I think that's partly one of the reasons why the DRYRivERS project received an honorable mention at the 2023 EU Prize for Citizen Scientists. I was just wondering, what the impact of being recognized at the with the award had on the project, and yeah, what comes next for your work.
So first, to be very honest, we were very happy to have this prize, really. That was rewarding for us because, as you said, we put lots of effort and it's kind of unknown from scientists because it's not well recognized by science to the citizen science. It's not very recognized on other topics as well. So that was good. We did not see any increase, for example, in the number of users after we got that prize, because I think communication was internal within the scientific community. So, and I think that was the purpose, right? I'm not complaining, but it was rewarding for us, but it has not changed the way the application is working and the success of the application. Perhaps it will next year, I don't know, next summer. Still, it was reassuring for us to see that what we are doing has value for some people, so let's continue. As you know, research projects are funded for a certain amount of time, and then no money. So we have already anticipated to secure funding to have a 5-year running of the application, of its maintenance, of the website maintenance, because all the data is open access. Everyone can put data, collect data. And we are also thinking about follow-up activity. For example, I am personally working on a ERC proposal. So I've got no guarantee it will be funded. I will try, but this ERC will build on this project and expand it at the international level to have some sort of world observatory of drying rivers. So we try to get money to continue this effort. We have seen the value of it. So the challenge is now to find money to keep it for decades.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very interesting. And that was my last question. So I just wanted to ask you if there's anything that you would like to add to let our listeners or viewers know about the project, or yeah, if there's anything we missed from our just general conversation.
No, the main message is if you care about water, if you care about all the benefit from swimming to drinking to gardening, etc., of the water, if you live close to a stream or river, don't hesitate to download the app and to use it, especially during the summer period, because who knows, your river might disappear due to climate change in the coming years. And having information about how flow is being observed is really important, not only for scientists, but also for society, I guess. So don't hesitate to use the app.
So a bit of a call to action. We'll add the links to the website and where they can download the app. But yeah, get out there and try and find some of these intermittent rivers, I suppose. I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, my turn. Thanks a lot, Chris. That was really interesting. And thanks a lot for the invitation.
Okay. Bye for now.